James Manyika is a senior partner at McKinsey and Company and chairman of the McKinsey Global Institute. James has worked with many of the world's leading technology companies on growth, innovation, and strategy. He's also served as vice chair of the Global Development Council in the Obama administration. James, great to see you. I assume you're safe and sound out on the Bay Area somewhere cool.
Good to see you, Steve. Yes, I'm sheltered in place in San Francisco.
Well, it's nice to see you. Look, James, you and I had talked many times about the positives that come potentially from major investment in technology, but also the disruption. And part of what I want to get into today is benchmarking where America is in the global competitive scene, because there's a lot going on. We tend to kind of, somewhat look at ourselves as America, where this all happening here. And I just wonder if that is a healthy way to do it. And you recently helped lead this task force in the Council on Foreign Relations on American competitiveness and innovation. And I'd love to get a snapshot from you on what our audience needs to hear that we have to take seriously when it comes to competitiveness in this industry, and what those equities should look like.
Well, thank you for the question, Steve. It's a very important question. I think the history of this is interesting. The United States, through federal funding and also the power of this private sector, has led for the last several decades when it comes to innovation, R&D investments around technology that allows to be competitive. So that has been historically the case. I think where we are now is that is not guaranteed to continue going forward. Part of that is driven by the fact that you have countries like China that, starting from a much lower base, are investing a heck of a lot more, again, starting from a lower base, in R&D investment and innovation. So they're rapidly catching up. And so as their economy grows, there's a possibility here that we will now have a real competitor when it comes to technology, science, and innovation. And you already see this in a few different arenas. So, for example, we've already had the experience of what's happening with 5G and connectivity technology, where arguably they may have gotten ahead of us in terms of innovation and deployment of those technologies. So this has become a real competitive global landscape.
When it has come to COVID-19 hitting us, and I know that you talk to a lot of people, both in industry, but you also government, is there a silver lining that people are now beginning to look at this area more than they would have otherwise? Alike on things like getting, one of the things we've been sort of flirting around today is universal connectivity, that we have a major gap when it comes to educating our children today. So you have a lot of kids that live in unconnected homes still, which is just remarkable to me, but it's true. That digital divide is a real provides an uneven ramp. We already had enough uneven ramps. The uneven ramp got even worse. So I guess my question is, do you find COVID an interesting inflection point that maybe the policy world and the business world will find ways to finally solve some of these problems?
Well, I think in many respects, COVID has been the great accelerator or inflection point, as you put it, when it comes to these issues. I would say that even running up to COVID, before COVID, there was already a sense that there's a handful of foundational technologies that are critical for both competitiveness, innovation, economic growth, but also, quite frankly, for national security and resilience. We can come back and talk about which ones those are. And then when we've gotten into COVID, COVID has exposed how even more fundamental those are. I'll mention just a couple. The issue of connectivity, we've always known that we've got a connectivity digital divide in the United States. But in a world in which we're living through COVID, and the only infrastructure that most people have come to rely on has been digital connectivity, this has made this issue even more transparent to everybody. I live in California, and I've been working on the governor's task force, and we realized that even the digital connectivity divide was far larger than we ever thought it was before COVID. I'll mention another area. We know that one of these foundational technologies has been the revolution and innovations happening in the biotech space. Guess what? COVID has reminded us that, in fact, this is so fundamental because we're racing, and we've been in a global race here to create vaccines. But this is already a competitive arena. So the area of needing to be very competitive and at the cutting edge of bioscience revolutions and innovations, as well as the related competitiveness around supply chains to do with medical products and supplies and protective equipment. COVID has brought all these things to the forefront, Steve.
Let me ask you another question about the flow of talent. And I want to go back to 9/11. And a few months after that, I had dinner with the then CEO of Intel, Craig Barrett, and then President Bush's science advisor, then John Marburger. And around that time, we began putting much higher walls to foreign students coming into the United States to participate in American engineering and science programs, because there was a concern that we didn't have the capacity then, way back when, to easily sort out, good people from bad people, as John Ashcroft said. So I'm going way back in history for this. Craig Barrett said, if we don't fix that problem of sorting good people from bad people and understand that America depends on the flow of smart brains and smart thinkers and innovators and risk takers, then we will take our production to them. We will take our R&D labs to them. John Marburger said, America won't be America unless we fix that problem. And that came from George W. Bush's science advisor. My question to you is, have we fixed that adequately or not? And are we seeing the unraveling of that story of America, or is there still time to bring it back together and return that? So I'd love to get your views on it, because it haunted me since that conversation ages ago on where we stand, because it doesn't look like it's gotten much better to me.
Well, it certainly hasn't. I mean, you mentioned the innovation task force that Admiral Bill McRaven and I led at the Council on Foreign Relations on innovation and national security. One of the key things we highlighted in our recommendations, and it's transparent everywhere, is that this talent issue is of fundamental importance to our competitiveness, but also, quite frankly, our innovation and growth and prosperity. And I think it comes in two parts. We absolutely need to dramatically scale the homegrown innovation talent in science and technology. I mean, the sheer number and the scale at which we need to grow homegrown talent, students who learn to love science and technology, have access and get the education, people who build those skills, is enormous, actually. It's so fundamental. At the same time, America has always benefited from being a magnet for attracting the world's talent. Look at many of the innovative companies in Silicon Valley. Look at that have been created by people born overseas. So we need both engines to work. I think the one that has probably been not working anywhere close to as well as it should work is the ability to develop homegrown talent. There's an enormous number of people in the United States who could be engineers, innovators, tinkerers of one sort or another, and we haven't built that ecosystem sufficiently and created the mechanisms for communities across the country, privileged, underprivileged, in low-income communities, to become engineers and scientists. That's some heavy lifting that we have to do, and it's so fundamental.
Real fast, James, because we're out of time, but I'm going to ask you a completely unfair question, but we're friends, so I can get away with it. When I look at the government and I look at, which positions are force multipliers in getting the science and tech picture in America right, or some area. I mean, one position is where Paul DeBarr is he's the Undersecretary of Energy for Science. Not that many people know the place, but he does enormously powerful and impactful things. Or in foreign affairs, it's policy planning at the State Department. I'd love to be that director, folks. If you want to give me a call, I'd love to do that. Jake Sullivan's old job. But if you were to basically pick a spot that we're not aware of, that would be someone who would have a disproportionate impact on course correcting us, so that competitiveness and that the innovation side of technology were enhanced, what would that position be?
Because you're my friend, at first I think there are 5, but I'll tell you the one that's at the top of that list. I think the one at the top of that list is whoever becomes or is the science advisor to the president, based in the White House, overseeing whether it's OSTP or PCAST, or kind of shaping the science and technology agenda from the vantage point of the White House advising the president. That's a fundamental position. But let me tell you why I said there are 5. There are a few other places where this really, really matters. I'd say what happens on technology in the Commerce Department on competitiveness and innovation is critically important. What happens in the Department of Defense, given the dual use nature of these technologies to our national security, is critically important. important. What happens in the State Department on technology is also fundamentally important, because we're going to need to work through our alliances and partners, and technology have that be part of the diplomatic toolkit of how we engage with the world is, again, so fundamental. In USTR, when it comes to trade, I mean, technology has become probably one of the core issues when it comes to global trade going forward. And I think historically it hasn't been center stage in how we approach trade and our relationships with others. So unfortunately, I have kind of 5 spots, Steve. But I think whatever happens in the White House, whether it's the science advisor or in national security or the National Economic Council, that's fundamentally important. So all of those are going to need to work together so closely. So it's a bit of an interagency, but I think it all starts at the top, at the White House.
James Manyika, chairman of the McKinsey Global Institute, I hereby invite you to write an op-ed on those 5 positions for the Hill. So if you want to, I will publish it. So thank you, James, very much for joining us today and for your important thoughts. And I'm glad you expanded to 5 folks. So I'm going to try to get those 5 positions all in the future in a future program with us. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve, for having me.